One of my big bugbears is how in LinkedIn people want to reach out and make a connection and they don't send a personal message. And I think, could you have given me 3 minutes of your time to say why you wanted to connect? I want a human connection here, not a technological connection. And I think it's, again, back to this notion of micro. It doesn't have to be big amounts of time, but could it be quality time?
Are you a solopreneur looking to 2 times your revenue to fund your lifestyle and give back? Well, this podcast is for you. We bring you inspirational guests sharing actionable tips to solve many of the struggles you face each and every day. And now over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Hello, you're listening to the Build, Live, Give podcast. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. And if you're a regular, thanks for your support. Our guest today is someone whose father was in his own building business and also some family members. And it really put them off building their own small business. So they decided to go into a career and they worked for several industries and several countries. And at the age of 40, they just took a sabbatical and fell into their own business, did a little bit of consulting, and then it rolled from there. So they now live in a beautiful property and they work with their husband to help people to maximize their potential. So what you will get by listening to this, why small tweaks can just make such an important difference to growing, how to pivot your business when an industry is changing, and the importance of having trusted experts. At the end, I'll also give you 3 other key takeaways that I had. So what I'll do now is hand you over to Helen Palmer from Questo. Welcome, Helen Palmer, to the Build, Live, Give show. What we will do, Helen, in a moment is ask you one of a very tricky question, but why don't I just say welcome?
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Excellent. So that tricky question is, what's something your family or friends would know about you that we wouldn't?
Well, I thought I'd actually start with something a little bit quirky. I live in the countryside outside Melbourne, and I'm in a perpetual tussle with wallabies in my garden. Now, I grew up in New Zealand, so it wasn't something I thought I'd grow up to experience, but it's just part of the reality of living in the Australian countryside. And, you know, philosophically, I could say it reminds me that I'm sharing a habitat with others who were here before me. And while I might be higher up the food chain, I have a responsibility for how I act. But stories and photographs get taken and get shared in workshops and courses for some light relief.
Great. And just for our global listeners, what's a wallaby look like?
Wow, there are different kinds, but a wallaby is different than a kangaroo. So I think of a wallaby as like a rat. It's got a rat-like face and it's brown, whereas I think of kangaroos are lovely. They've got more of a dog-like face and they are grey.
Very good. And height-wise, what's the size of a wallaby compared to a kangaroo?
Wallaby's smaller than a kangaroo. Wallaby probably about maybe 0.7 metres. I guess that's about 2 feet for your international listers.
Yes. Great. And what are some of the craziest things they've done to your property?
They eat my garden. They eat my vegetable garden. I've actually got this running list of things in the wallaby appetite. So I've discovered they will eat zucchini leaves in a pinch. They'll leave thyme, but they will eat mint and they will eat sage and they will eat beans. Yeah, it's a running list.
And I know that, you know, often it's a shiny disc or it's a snake. You know, there's different things. An owl can sometimes, you know, scare off willing predators, but it sounds like you haven't found that device for a wallaby.
Well, actually, we have water guns. My husband's on a perpetual creative problem-solving gig to try and find out. And at the moment, it's water guns that are triggered by a sensor. But he's actually working on some sonic stuff. So he gets his electronic gear out on a winter night and is looking for something that might actually trigger noise and also some light to actually distract them. But a lot of people want to tell us about fences. But one of the things about these creatures is we'd have to build very high fences that would ruin the design of our property.
Yes, well, it sounds like there's a mini series or something.
Absolutely,
that will come out of this. I can't wait to follow it. So, you know, I know that you know, you've had an extensive career. I sort of went through your LinkedIn, and it was, you know, an amazing career across New Zealand and Australia. But just tell us about how you pivoted into, you know, your own business.
Well, it's an interesting one because my father runs his own business as a builder and my sister married a man who had their own business. So at the tender age of about 20, there was a lot of pressure to actually go into business for myself. But I saw exactly what it actually meant to be in business. So it wasn't until I was 40. So there was about 23 years of working with a stint at university in there. And it came about because I found that many different jobs that were around weren't just fitting me. And so I decided I actually wanted to shape the work that I was doing. And so I pivoted. I had been working at a university and had just finished a 5-year stint there. And I decided to take a 3-month sabbatical. And during that sabbatical, somebody came along with a short-term contract for a piece of work. And I thought, oh, what the heck? And then it was like, whoa, actually, I'm kind of doing my own thing. Well, maybe I should form a bit of a business. So it wasn't sort of a full-on clear thought, oh, I'm leaving, I'm going to go run my own business. It sort of evolved from what next? Well, let me try this. And steps went from there.
Great. So you just seized on the opportunity and it became the new career.
Indeed.
Excellent. And, I do ask people, was it harder or easier than you expected running your own business? Certainly, drawing back on, looking at your father and others that had done it in the past.
Yes and no. And I had been working many times as a consultant inside somebody else's business. So I had a bit of that sense of what it was to work in a business and work on a business. And so taking that mentality and applying it to myself actually became quite seamless. At the point of thinking about money and the cash flow, that's often the biggest thing that people aren't familiar with. But my husband and I had put ourselves in a financial situation where we mentally decoupled the notion of work and money coming in. So I think that transition made it easier too, because particularly when you are working for yourself, you don't have the regular income coming in the bank account. So you think very differently about when you work and when the money comes in.
Yeah. And how much of a runway did you give yourself? Like how much time did you allow that to be?
Do you mean how much time in terms of financial?
Yeah. So that buffer that you had, how, in your mind, how long did that last? Was it, 6 months, 12 months?
It was about a 6-month buffer. I mean, we were very fortunate in that we were saving for a house and we hadn't chosen to buy a house at that point. So there was considerable amount of money in the bank, but we were very clear to think about we're not using all that money to live. There's a portion of that money that we're thinking as the covering of the business. Now, I was the one who went into business, and at that stage, my husband wasn't with me. He was doing his own thing with another client or another business that he was working with in a contract. So that gave me a little bit of buffer as well. At least there was another steady income coming in during that period.
Great. And both you now, are you both running your own businesses?
Yes, we came in together, and when we did actually decide, hey, I think there's a business here, we should form a PTY Limited, we both put our names on it from a directorship point of view, and we both started to craft what our service offerings were. And we weren't public about the name for about probably 2 years. It was more about, that was just a foundation. He had gigs and clients that he worked on. I had gigs and clients that we worked on. And it was 2008, which I'll just link to the global financial crisis. Mm-hmm. We had about a 2-year period where work was coming in. And then the effects of the global financial crisis really kind of struck the two industries that we were in, at which point we had to sit back and think, okay, what is this business? What is its name? Let's have a website. Let's think a little bit more beyond just having a business card and form up some service offerings. And we took a different marketing strategy at that point.
Right. And what was that new direction? What did you pivot to?
Particularly, it had been more about, when people came along who knew us, who wanted a piece of work, we would just have a conversation about that piece of work. Whereas now we started thinking, actually, we're going to offer services. And for me, it was services around information management, knowledge management, change management at a more strategic level. And for Robert, it was more about information and business administration at more of a tactical level.
Okay, great. And was there ever a time, especially around that 2008, where you and Robert thought, this is just too difficult. Maybe it's time to go back to working for someone else?
Well, in 2010, we did at a point when the business was pivoting, because that was the time we bought a house and all of that money that had been in the bank account for a deposit now went to the bank. So there was a bit of a, oh my goodness, what have we done moment at that point in time. But I think there was something about us in the mental switch that we'd made to the level of autonomy that we could have, the level of shaping our work, that it was almost like, I don't know that we could go back. It just felt like there was no backward step. We had to keep going forward. We also were of the opinion that, well, even if we did go and work for somebody else in that more employment model, it would be more a short-term thing, not a long-term thing. And really, we could just frame it as another gig with another client.
Yeah, look, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And was there anything in particular that you did to change that trajectory in 2010?
I think it was about then getting a website up, thinking about, well, what is the nature of those service offerings, and firming them up into something, particularly when you start thinking, right, there's a web page, so we offer consulting and information management. What actually is that nature of that consulting? Who's going to benefit from it? What are they going to gain? What is the terms and conditions around it? So it was firming up some of those things, which was really good because it also forced us to think about, well, why are we doing this? And what are the terms and conditions that we actually want to be operating on, not just the terms and conditions that we want to put in front of the client.
Great. And I know it's always great having, a business partner to bounce ideas off, but who else has sort of supported you through this journey?
There have been occasional mentors who have come along. I've not had a mentor who's been a consistent person in the background, but I'm a believer that the universe will provide. And so there have been different people, and it's one of those terrible things. I can't even recall particular names because they've been very occasional, and it might have just been one thing they said in a coffee conversation that made me realize, this is not uncommon, or actually that's a very useful thought. And it's been very micro in terms of the advice that I might have been given. And it feels like I've synthesized it in such a organic way that it's very hard to go back and find the source per se.
And have you ever been in any paid mentorship, coaching, mastermind, anything like that?
Whereas I have been paying somebody else for those services?
Yes.
No, I haven't. I had a person as a professional supervisor when I was an employee inside an organisation, and that was particularly because of the change management work that I was doing, and that was a paid thing. But in terms of running my own business, no, there hasn't been anybody.
Okay, excellent. Well, look, the next section we'll move on to is the build section. So when someone says, Helen, what do you do at Questo? How do you answer that?
Well, I've got a little bit of a quirky way that I can actually answer it. The name Helen Palmer, it turns out when you stick it in an anagram generator, it comes out with help me learn. And so when people ask me what I do, I say I help other people learn so something different is possible. And I can do this in a variety of ways. And that depends on who's asking, will depend on the ways that I'll tell them about. And so it might be that I can do it through consulting, that I do it through coaching, through mentoring, through facilitating, through teaching. And ultimately behind all of it is I care about people's experience of work, and I care about the wastage of human potential in the world, and particularly because I think we're in a world that needs people to be at their best to solve the challenges that we face as humanity, and I'm trying to do something positive about those two things.
Great. And what do you know about learning that many of us listening wouldn't or may not?
That very small things can have a big impact. Do not underestimate the power of a tweak or the power of an insight just to suddenly shift and awaken a person to a very different reality.
Yeah. Have you read any material by James Clear?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So he's got a book called Atomic Habits.
Okay.
And I highly recommend everyone reading it. It's great. I listened to it on Audible, but he does talk about that British cycling where they were, basically so embarrassing that the top brands didn't even want them riding their bikes. That's how embarrassing the sport had got to the point I think they had, in the 2000, the British when the Olympics were in London, they basically had massive success. And, then they've had 2 Tour de France winners, multiple winners, et cetera, et cetera. So they went from nothing to world champions, and it was all about that 1%. So, just those 1% tweaks.
Yes.
Is what got them there. And also the 4% zone. So always being in the 4% zone that just pushes you far enough that it stretches you, but not too far, that it becomes
good.
Too far. So yeah, I completely agree around, all those little small things that have a big impact. And I'll put in the show notes the link to James's book. And
one of the things about that is it's really challenging from a selling point of view, and this might be of interest to your listeners, that when I do strongly believe in those small tweaks and those small things, but it's kind of like, would somebody want to pay me? Because then it's kind of like, oh, well, that piece of advice, that took you 5 minutes. It's like, well, what would I be paying you for? It's like, yes, but if that small insight made a difference in your life, maybe that saved you time or saved you the embarrassment of making mistakes. And so it becomes a real challenge if you're in an advisory role where the people tend to think that the volume of something is actually what they're paying for rather than the impact of something.
Yeah, look, it's a great point. And I think it's a little bit like business, where business became so number focused that they lost, I think Margaret Thatcher was quoted to say that, the British economy is not like a bicycle, it's more like a frog,
Right.
and she just treated it as a bicycle, and unfortunately it didn't work the way that she dismantled it. Well, not at the time. And I think that's similar to, how business sometimes just looks at the results and it's short term, etc.
Yes.
And yes, often, for people that I work with and help them put their value proposition together, and the value, yes, sometimes it's difficult. And I love that quote, like a plumber, where, someone comes and they basically, fix a leak, and it takes them 2 minutes, and they say, here's $20,000 bill. And the guy goes, what? You were here 2 minutes. He said,
yes.
Yeah, but if I hadn't fixed that leak, it would have cost you $300,000 plus you're buying all my experience on learning how to fix that. So,
absolutely. And for the people listening, I think if you are an advisory business, that's one of the common challenges that I find about how to kind of quantify what it is I do and how that people perceive that they're getting value from that.
Yeah, and what's your most current thinking on that? How do you solve that currently?
I tend to make sure that I'm in a very strong relationship with the customer, because if they don't know you, then they tend to think at a very transactional level. Whereas when they have a sense of, yes, actually you are a person I trust, you're a person who actually knows about me. So it's not like I'm just turning up with a little nugget that I pulled off the shelf and gave them. There's something about it's sitting on relationship and connection that I have understood and empathized with them. And it kind of sneaks in a bit more subversively maybe about, oh, you knew me. Yeah, that was the thing I need. And so context becomes very important, but very much that it comes from relationship.
And what are, 3 key things that's working really well for you in building those relationships?
Time. Actually putting aside time, thinking that relationship is actually relational, not just a connection. I mean, one of my big bugbears is how in LinkedIn people want to reach out and make a connection and they don't send a personal message. And I think, could you have given me 3 minutes of your time to say why you wanted to connect? I want a human connection here, not a technological connection. And I think it's, again, back to this notion of micro. It doesn't have to be big amounts of time, but could it be quality time? Could you actually make a connection where you're thinking about me and finding something that we can connect over rather than just 2 pieces of technology hooked us up together? So that's one. 2 other things. I think there's something about being open and recognizing that I'm in service to somebody else. So I don't come from the point of view of, hey, I've got a solution looking for a problem. Tell me about your problem and I'm going to make my solution for your problem. It's what's going on for you? What is actually the need that you have most pressing? And I'm of the view that if I can't serve that need, maybe I can, but it's not directly, it's by introducing somebody else, then I'm going to do that. I'm much more about helping the person and what they need, not selling my services and making sure that I get a sale. And I think tied to that notion for number 3 is very much, I'm in service here. I'm in service to you. So what actually is of value to you? And putting ego aside, I think sometimes, particularly when you've gone out on your own, there's a sense where it took a certain maybe hubris or personality to kind of push forward and be solo, but then recognizing you need to put that aside and put that in check because you're in service to somebody else and it's not about you, it's about them.
Brilliant. And I know we've got a simple thing where we don't accept anyone that doesn't, I don't accept any requests that don't have a personal message. So we always send back and say, how did you find us? Was it through my podcast? Was it through my posts? And then most people reply and say, look, it was your great post on X or it was your podcast, but at least you then know that
Absolutely.
connection, because you don't want that next email to be a triage of, look, here's all what we do, and would you like this? And as far as for you in the next 12 months, sort of what's the key focus for you in the next 12 months in Questo?
I'm looking that I'll probably do a pivot about 1 July, which is convenient because it's the Australian beginning of the financial year. But I have been working in change management advisory services, and I'm seeing a change in the market. And the market's changing from wanting more internal change capability built inside organisations, which is great. And also, I think the nature of change is very complex, and I'm a believer that you need to be inside the system to make that change. So as a person who's offering a business service on the outside, I'm moving from offering services that are the more normal consultory advisory to more the training, teaching, coaching, mentoring side of things, but looking for a way that it's not just traditional coaching, mentoring, and looking if there's a way maybe it can sort of be community-based. So I guess the overall notion there is changing what the notion of that product suite is and how it actually would be experienced by clients.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that come the 1st of July. And will that mean a brand change, or will the brand still stay the same?
Questo brand will stay the same, but there's an element within that I'm seeing that a level of change is tied to the notion of innovation and being maybe a separate brand that would have more the innovation facilitation type services rather than just change per se.
Great. And will that have much of an impact on the way that you set your pricing?
Yes, it will, because I think the innovation facilitation, I'm looking at as something that's more for small to medium businesses.
Yes.
That's what you get for starting the morning out with a good coffee. The small to medium businesses, and potentially those who are in sort of a startup phase, which means they have a very different sense of what they're prepared to pay than large organisations.
True, and but hopefully the cycles are a lot shorter, so you get less money, but you get it quicker.
Indeed,
and hopefully you get it longer because they're more loyal. As far as leads for you in the current business, what's your number one source of leads in the current?
It's the networking and trusted references. So again, it's very, very relational, and that I have a particular mind of who are the clients that I would or wouldn't want. So if people are wanting somebody just to be very transactional and just come in and offer something, I tend to back away from that, particularly with the change management advisory services that I was offering. Sometimes they just want a body for hire, and it's like, well, I'm not actually a body. I'm coming in to find out what the need is and where I can meet it or not, and maybe recommend somebody else. But it becomes very much about, for me, not just who wants to work with me, but who do I want to work with. So yes, the networking and the trusted references become the key source of leads for me.
And I suppose now going into SME businesses and startups, will it be the same approach, do you think you'll take, or will you need to change it given the fact that you may have less people in that cohort?
I have changed to a different approach, but it's one that I'm not just really confident at the moment to say out loud on a podcast that might be going around in the world. Okay. So I'm focusing on a group of people where I'm spending more intense time with them in service to them, and I'm seeing it almost like as a way as I'm auditioning, but they don't know that I'm auditioning and that to them, but I'm making myself indispensable to them, to use the Seth Godin language, in terms of the way that I'm serving them in a particular forum. Okay,
great. Well, we'll stay tuned to that one until
sure.
It does become public. And who supports you? Do you have a team of people or anybody that supports you in the background?
So Robert, my husband, operates as my business manager. He's also the director of the business, and so he's a great sounding board. He's been somebody who's always been a sounding board and supporter of everything that I've done in my working life. We've been together for 27 years now, and some of that was I actually went to university when I was married to him in my late 20s. So he read every paper that I wrote. So I tell him he got a free education from my undergraduate and then my postgraduate education. So he's a very core person, and both from the function point of view, but also from the emotional point of view. And then I've built some very trusted suppliers around me. And if there was something that I would say to people who are listening to this, when you find a trusted supplier, treat them worth their weight in gold, because you want somebody that you actually can trust to deliver service, but also who can understand what you're about and how you're maybe wanting to do things in terms of timing and quality and things like that.
Yeah, and look, that's certainly one of the key things we've got in our membership is we've got about 400 trusted experts, as we call them, around the world that you can tap into, and you know that they're going to do a great job, because that's the hardest thing I found from corporate into my own business. Yeah, as a solopreneur, was just who do you trust? In corporate, it was a lot easier.
Yes, and I saw a post that you put up a few weeks ago, or might have been a couple of months ago now, about how you had learned from different potential collaborations that there are some people that you shouldn't work with. And I was like, yes, Paul, you've got it right. Hooray.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard because you're effectively flying blind, because, when you're in corporate, you've got a procurement department, there's a whole lot of history there.
Yes.
Whereas, some people, and you don't know on their trajectory, because some people could absolutely be superstars and just starting out.
Yes.
But how do you pick those from the ones that aren't? So, yeah, I think, trusted experts, trusted suppliers, I think is so critical for your growth, especially when you run a solo business and you need to tap into people like that. Yes. So just before we go into the next section, I know you talked about LinkedIn, and I'd just like to talk about some of the killer content LinkedIn, and I know you just mentioned a post as well, but if you just search for Build, Live, Give and find me as an employee and send me a personal invitation, as Helen said before, I won't accept it unless it's a personal one. But say you've heard Helen and I on this podcast, and once we're connected, you will then get access to my daily content. And the key thing that we want to do is help people double their business to fund their lifestyle and give back, and for Helen to really find a solution to this wallaby problem. So moving on to the live section. Tell us about some daily habits that really help you to be successful.
A key one is I book time in my calendar. Now, that's time for appointments with myself. It really keeps me honest about how much time I actually have, and it keeps me focused in the day. So I don't really have a to-do list per se. It's things I booked in the calendar in half an hour or hour slots, and it includes having breaks in there as well. And it helps me see if there are impacts of something that suddenly comes across my radar, if I have to improvise and move time around, actually how much time I actually have.
Great. And on average, how many hours a week would you work?
Maximum of 50. I'm really quite disciplined. And a lot of people think, when you work for yourself, it must be crazy, crazy hours. But I actually hold a very strong sense in my mind that the time that I devote to the business is time that I devote to the business. But I need a break away from it. And so that's mini breaks during the week. But I very much value that my Saturday and Sunday and my weekend is time away from the business.
Yeah, and where's your office? I'm assuming you've got a home office. Where's it situated compared to the rest of the house?
It's got its own room, so I absolutely can shut the door. I can walk into it, right. and both my husband and I, we don't have children, so we actually have our own rooms as offices, and there's very much a sense of when you cross that threshold, I'm in a workspace, but when I close the door, work's finished for the day. Yeah,
I think that's an excellent thing, and we've just recently built a new house, or it's, a year old, and I put my office upstairs, knowing that all the living area, so same thing on the weekend, I'm not tempted just to walk past my office and go, I'll just, no one's looking, I'll just spend, half an hour that turns into 2 hours that takes from, for me personally is time with my children.
Well, it's interesting you say tempted there, because there are sometimes my brain's very creative and I'll come across an idea, but I've learned another habit where write it down, because if I don't, it'll keep there being in my mind. I must remember that. Write it down, walk into the office, stick it on the whiteboard, walk out of the office, and I'm done. So it's not like it's a completely off bounds, but if I have something, write it down. Otherwise it'll keep playing around in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you can also use, digital, like I have a similar thing in Evernote. So I have a process of checking my ideas the next day or on a Monday. Right. So check my ideas from the weekend. So then, I think that's a great way of departmentalizing work and play. And when it is me time, so on the weekends, what are some of the things that you love to do with that time that you've, not investing in your business?
And then when I'm not chasing wallabies.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I didn't want to presume that you'd be a gardener, but anyway.
Well, I am a gardener, and that's, part of the perpetual tussle with the wallabies. So I live on a 2.25 acre property, and it's in a lot of bush, but there are different areas where I feel like I get to use my hands. My mind goes into sort of a meditative neutral, and sometimes it's like seaweed, pull weed. It's a very simple kind of task, whereas some of my work life has got much more deeper thinking to it. So there's a kind of simplicity to it. But there's also a creative element where I think that area of the land there, it's a bit of a blank canvas. What do I want to do with it? And I can be project managery-ish if I want to, or I can be completely, to my husband's despair, very unorganized and unscheduled and chaotic about how I approach what I'm doing. But it's a lovely contrast to my daily work life.
Excellent, Breen. And the next section's the give section. So what's a charity or a community that you're passionate about, and why?
I'm really passionate about the notion of empowering people, and that's maybe empowering them through knowledge, maybe empowering them through a connection they don't have that I can facilitate, or some kind of material support or financial support. And I like supporting individuals who are being entrepreneurial. Maybe they're making a new product or service, and crowdfunding. When I come across people recently, there was somebody who's writing a book about death, and I thought, what a wonderful idea. So she's got some funding from me to help get her book off. There's a group of people in the Philippines who are trying to build a business for themselves that would actually allow them to pay for the education for their children. So we built a goat for the people in the Philippines. But back home, in terms of face-to-face, I do a volunteer in a number of professional communities who are exploring and growing. And there are different individuals who might be wanting to change their workscape. So I will do coffee chats to encourage them, and there's free resources that I've created and I share with them.
Brilliant. Well, the last section is the action section, where I'll ask you some questions and get some rapid fire responses. So the first is, what are your top 3 personal effectiveness tips?
Number 1, I ensure there's some professionally enrichment time in every week. And that's time that might just be playing with something or creating something. I don't have to be developing something, but it's about, nourishing my soul. Number 2, manage your email. I know there are people who say email's dead and it should go away, but I'm very disciplined. So anybody who sends me an email, I will have seen it. I will know whether I'm going to action or take care of it. So no email gets missed. And number 3 is, I said this a bit before, but be really nice to your quality suppliers. They're worth their weight in gold, and particularly if you've built a relationship such that you can delegate to them at short notice under flexible conditions, that makes me very effective.
Great. And what's some of the technology that you would find it difficult to run your business without?
Well, calendar, as I mentioned before, I live and die by my calendar. The OneNote notebooking tool, I heard you say Evernote before, and I'm just going to say, I'm sorry, OneNote wins hands down. Another piece of tech, Hootsuite is really great for planning and publishing social media. And the other one that we often forget that's tech is pen and paper. I would actually die. I could lose my car keys, I could lose my phone, but if I didn't have pen and paper in my handbag for jotting stuff down, then that would really be limiting.
Have you heard of Rocketbook?
I've seen it being advertised.
Yeah, so have a look at that, because it gives you the best of both worlds. You can handwrite, but you can then take a photo in the app and it automatically uploads to anywhere that you choose to in the cloud. So you get the best of both worlds.
Very good.
Excellent. And what's the best source of new ideas to help you with your business? I know you said, you love to take that professional time to learn, but what are some of the best sources for you?
So I see that I have a personal learning network, and there are different people who come from different perspectives, be it the area they work in or the discipline that they're coming from, or just something about how they orientate to the world. And so I have at least 2 catch-ups with people a week, and it's partly professionally enriching for myself, but also simply to see what's going on in the world and how people are seeing things differently.
Okay, brilliant. And the last question, and it's a big one, but what's the impact that you want to leave on the world?
There's a couple, because I'm going to go for the big ones here. I want people to have a better experience of work, and I want individuals to recognise the potential they have, both general and specific, and that they're liberated to use it. One of the things that kind of, would make me cry is the waste of human heart and human knowledge that's locked up because people are in limited conditions or have got limiting beliefs. The second one is actually I want to help smart, generous collectors collectives get together to solve urgent problems we have in the world. Because I think there's lots of individuals doing things, and I think, why can't they all come together? Again, it's about that waste of human heart and knowledge. If we all came together, we could be far more effective and actually knock off some of these problems while having a great time.
Brilliant. And look, you can find out more about Helen and the great work that she's doing at now, is it questo.com or questo.com.au?
.com.au.
Great. So questo.com.au. We'll have all the links in the show notes. And I know Helen's mentioned lots of valuable content, so we'll have it in there. And if anyone is listening and they do have a solution for wallabies, Helen would love to hear from you. So Helen, thanks a lot for coming on the show today and sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you, Paul.
Great. Thank you. Bye. So that was such an enjoyable podcast with Helen. So my 3 key takeaways. So one is pivoting to SME. So when it's not working in corporate and you can see the dark clouds on the horizon, pivot. And that's what Helen's doing. The second is blocking learning time. So making sure that that time you spend on you and developing yourself in the business is blocked into your diary and it's non-negotiable. The third is how to cap your working hours. So Helen talked about, the 50 hours and how she manages that. I think it's so important not to work too many hours in your own business. So you can get the links and actions from Helen and this episode in the show notes, and that'll be at buildlivegive.com/podcast. And also I'd love to hear your view on the podcast. So you can email me at paul@buildlivegive.com. And also, if you'd love to be a guest yourself, you can email me as well. So please take action to build your business, to fund your lifestyle, and to give back.
Thank you for listening to the Build, Live, Give podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. It would mean the world to us.